This story was shared by Corporal Oscar, a U.S. Marine. It happened during a mountain warfare training exercise in the Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center, Bridgeport, California. When I enlisted in the Marine Corps, it took me a while to get used to being in the military. Some of the most mundane tasks seemed very strange to me at first. One such task was going to the field. Initially, I thought we were literally going to an open grassy field, setting up tents, and living outside for a few days. While work was involved, I imagined it like camping with extra steps. I wasn't entirely wrong, but we never had tents since we were in recon. We spent our time doing patrols and roughing it out in the jungle, much like Mowgli. Even if we did have tents, the military's idea of setting them up was different. Unlike civilians who pick safe, dry spots for camping, the military often didn't. Maybe the Air Force did, as they seemed to camp at the Hilton. However, at my first duty station in Hawaii, going to the field meant packing a week's worth of supplies: food, water, fuel, batteries, rifles, personal gear, radios, and so on. We would then drive in convoy or hop on a helicopter to one of the many military training installations on the island, most of which were covered in thick jungle. Going to the field varied depending on location. In Hawaii, it was often windy, rainy, and miserable at night, but there wasn't much animal life to bother us besides the occasional painful centipede bite. On the other hand, training at Camp Pendleton in California meant encounters with rattlesnakes and cacti in the desert. The following stories are about training in two different locations. One from a Marine in Northern California's mountains and another from a National Guardsman in Wisconsin's mountains. These stories involve encounters with something not quite human, something known collectively as a pale crawler or rake. Marine Corps Mountain Warfare Training Center, Bridgeport, California. This story was emailed to me by a young Marine who wished to remain anonymous. He is still on active duty and doesn't want his command to berate him for sharing this bizarre story or draw any unwanted attention. My name is Corporal Oscar with the United States Marine Corps. I have a story from our platoon's time in Bridgeport for a mountain training exercise a couple of years ago, from September to October. Our platoon, Alpha 2 of 1st Combat Engineer Battalion, went to Bridgeport for a joint exercise with our Victor unit. Before arriving, we were briefed back at Camp Pendleton about high-altitude pulmonary edema and how the oxygen difference at altitude could cause hallucinations. We also heard other strange stories about the training area, such as people waking up to see marine animal packers, Marines patrolling with horses and donkeys, walking through their patrol bases at night. At Bridgeport's lower base camp, we had 2 days to acclimate to the altitude. During this time, we explored the surrounding mountains, sometimes climbing areas we weren't supposed to, and took some cool pictures. The strange activities began around 2 weeks into our stay. We always joked about skinwalkers grabbing us in the middle of the night, but something did show up. One night, during an operation we called the Cool Sea, probably combat operation something, we were at Bridgeport's highest landing zone, LZ Owl. We set up shelter with our tarps for the night against a tree growing up a large rock face. We used large rocks and wooden stakes to anchor down our tarps in a pyramid shape, keeping water off and our gear dry underneath. One night, freezing snow started falling, and we went under our tarps into our sleeping bags around 9 p.m. I woke up around 10 p.m. to the sound of someone racking the charging handle of their weapon. It was dead quiet, and we were supposed to be in a tactical environment, so unnecessary noises would piss someone off. Our rifles were next to us, but only the water dog's rifle was behind the tree where only he could see it. I assumed he was messing with his bayonet again and asked if it was him. He got up and said it wasn't him. Thinking it was one of the infantry guys messing with us, I crawled out from under the tarps with my knife to threaten whoever it was. But there was nobody nearby. My sergeant saw me and asked what I was doing. I told him about the noise, and he asked the nearby infantry on fire watch, who also knew nothing about it. We were told to go back to sleep. The next morning, our tarps were on the ground. The small boulders and stakes we used were nowhere to be found. Our sergeant told us that he saw a bald, naked, human-looking figure with shining eyes looking over from the top of the rock face. It ducked away immediately when spotted. We have no idea what it was, but whatever it was far more disciplined in silence than any infantryman or marine I've ever met. I have a few pictures as proof of our time in Bridgeport if necessary. Before we continue the story, I encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you. This next story was submitted by a National Guardsman to the Phantoms. I want to share an experience I had while training with my National Guard unit at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin. I moved from enlisted to officer via OCS and was attached to a unit in my MOS. In 2014, my platoon conducted nighttime land navigation at Fort McCoy from 2030 to 0030. While the Army usually promotes buddy pairs, night land navigation is one of the few cases where we do it solo to ensure individual qualification. I stepped off on my plotted route with my compass, map, and headlamp in hand. For those unfamiliar, land navigation involves finding markers on a course by plotting their coordinates on a map and walking from point to point using various techniques. At night, this is done with minimal light, usually a red lens flashlight. The area was frequently traveled, and we had around 15 soldiers moving about. I planned to walk out, hit my points, take a break for an hour, and then head back. The first half went as planned, and I ended up sitting on a hillside around 10 p.m. It was cloudy, but the moon was full, giving intermittent light. Occasionally, I saw red lights bobbing in the distance and some platoon members using white light to read their maps. By the end of my break, I didn't see any more motion, so I assumed most people had either finished or were lost and took a road back. As I continued, I saw a head and shoulder silhouette against the clouds, backlit by the moon. I walked up to ask if they needed help getting down when the shadow twitched and turned toward me. I realized it wasn't a person. In the moonlight, I saw a stretched out, bald figure with long arms clutching the stump. Its face was pinched, and it looked skinny but strong. I swore loudly, and it scurried down the trunk. I flicked my red light on and saw it on all fours moving toward the brush line. I quickly cycled my headlamp to white light, but it was gone by the time I got it working. I walked at an angle to link up with a road, figuring it would be safer. As I neared the end of the clearing, I heard rustling and saw movement. I sprinted to the road and kept running until I couldn't hear it anymore. After catching my breath, I heard a branch move about 30 feet up a tree. I saw a pale, oval-shaped face peeking at me. I ran again until I saw the headlights of our LMTVs. It was 12:15 when I checked my watch. When asked why I was out of breath and covered in mud, I lied and said I got lost. Since then, I've never experienced anything like that again at Fort McCoy. While I've done night land navigation alone a few times since, I still think about that night and wonder if the world is stranger than I previously believed. The story is incredibly good. Now I give an opinion about the story. This story is both gripping and chilling, capturing the essence of unexpected encounters in remote and challenging environments. Corporal Oscar's narrative, set against the backdrop of rigorous military training, effectively blends the mundane with the eerie, creating a sense of suspense that draws the reader in. The detailed descriptions of military life, combined with the unsettling encounter with an unknown entity, make the story relatable yet unnerving. It highlights the unpredictability of nature and the psychological strain of intense training, making one ponder the boundaries between reality and the supernatural. Overall, it's a compelling read that leaves a lasting impression, urging one to question the unexplained phenomena encountered in the wilderness.